All right, welcome to Russell Street Reports 2025 Round 1 Draft live stream. I'm excited to have Jared Pender and John Huey here with me. Guys, how's it going today?
Good, how are you?
Doing
I'm
well.
doing
Looking forward to seeing what the Ravens ultimately do at the 27th pick. And with that in mind, I had the question I wanted to start with the both of you. Give me one player that you would be happy with, one player that you'd be okay with, and one player that you would have a problem with at the 27th overall pick. So, Jared, why don't we start with you?
all right. So, obviously, this exercise is based upon who is there on the board. So, I'm basing this off of what I've kind of seen, like the rumors of like who's going to be there. You also have to remember this is a very weird draft. A lot of top talent in this draft for what the Ravens need. They have some issues in terms of medical concerns and off the field concerns. So it could be very real that a player that you might not think is going to be there, but they might be off the Ravens board. So a player that I would really like at 27 is going to be for me considering everything with the concerns with the defensive lineman. I think Donovan Izaraku would be a straight up just double down the line easy pick for the Ravens to make. I think he'll be there at 27. I really like this tape. I think he's a really good player. Does he provide the value of a number one edge rusher? Maybe not, but I think he would be a really good change up to Odafe Owe's power, get a little bit more speed, a little more athleticism into the building. He would be I could see him having a really good career for the Ravens. A pick that I would be okay with, but I wouldn't really be all that jazzed about would be Alabama's guard Tyler Booker. I think Booker's a good player. In the right scheme, I think he's a solid, good player. The issue is that the Ravens have historically never really valued guard. So if this is the year to value guard and he's on the board, why not just take North Dakota State's Gray Zabel? Because Zabel offers you the tackle flexibility. He's not a pure guard like Booker is. He's more athletic than Booker, it wouldn't really make sense to me unless Zabel's off the board. And then a pick that I would really not like is I don't know how hot this is, but this is a player back in the combine that was in potential number one talks at his position that I had to go back and watch the tape to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Nick Amenori, safety out of South Carolina. I I don't see it, man, with the tape. I get he's a great athlete. He's got size, he's got power, he's got tackling, but I see his tape and I am just reminded of Louis Sean, a former safety prospect from Georgia. His one role in Georgia's defense was stay deeper than the deepest and just go make plays. I don't see it, man.
Yeah, so I think for me, I'd be happy with Zuraku. Zabel, I just have my doubts about a small school player a small school tackle who projects best to the interior. We've seen small school linemen play well. They have typically been players who played on the interior, although sometimes they played outside in college, moved to the interior in the pros. Um, I would be surprised if more than anything if the Ravens did that. Because he really does profile as a guard. He's not a guy I see as a long-term tackle. And I think if they were to go interior O-line, I would expect them to go with Alabama's Tyler Booker, just given his potential fit in, they still have somewhat of a gap scheme. So, and then your last one, Nick and Moore, I'm right on board with. I agree that is not the best safety in the draft. I think that there are definitely Malachi Starks is clearly the best safety, and I think Iman Wari is such a tweener that I'm more worried about him ending up like Isaiah Simmons because he can't really find a role than I am him getting to like a Kyle Hamilton point. I don't see that comp at all beyond physical. So John, why don't we go over to you? One player you'd be okay with, or one player you'd be happy with, one player you'd be okay with, one player you'd have a problem with.
One person I'd be okay with, just coming off of especially Daniel Jeremiah's recent mock draft, would be Kenneth Grant, defensive tackle from Michigan. I think he, just like DJ says, he gives that Haloti Nagata feel. We just watched the Eagles run through the NFC with a dominating defensive line and a pass rush. I think Odafe Owe is more solid than fans give him credit to. KVN still going to get to the quarterback. Now we just got to worry about getting beef up front, especially losing Michael Pierce now after his retirement. Somebody I would be okay with, Tyler Booker for sure. I mean, I like his pass pro, like the fact he didn't surrender, I think, a single sack last year in the SEC. And everybody knows SEC ball is premier college football, in my opinion. And then, I mean, a guy I'm just not high on that I see a lot of people giving us is Derek Harmon from Oregon. Production's there sometimes. I feel he got pretty quiet in some of the biggest games, especially when Oregon needed him most. But towards the end of their playoff run, also, I mean, he was not the presence that Oregon needed, especially in that Rose Bowl game. So, I mean, if he was there and we want to continue to, or if we want to address the defensive line, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't be happy with Harmon, but I guess there's definitely worse picks that we could take. I mean, Emin Warrior that you guys are saying, I'm not high on him either. I think Xavier Watts is a better safety in later rounds if we wanted to address that position.
Yeah, so I think I agree. I would rather hope that Watts drops to the second round than trying to use a first rounder on Emin Warrior. Although a guy that I would really be happy with is Malachi Starks. I just don't think he gets there. I'm particularly worried about the Eagles trading up in front of the Ravens to get another Georgia player. That just feels like a very Howie Roseman thing for him to do. So that's the player I'd be really happy with. Him or Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. I think that having a pretty solid offensive tackle prospect. He could flip and play guard early on, but I know he has that knee issue. In Baltimore, to have the time to get back to the field and become the left tackle much later on. Wouldn't be asked to do too much necessarily as a rookie, which is good when you're coming off that injury. Those are players I'd be happy with. Players I'd be okay with. I'm actually going to flip over to my board here. Players I'd be okay with. I think Nick Scorton is a guy that I've talked myself into partially just because of the age. And I think that him being young and having the some of the NFL ready frame is something the Ravens like at the end of the first round, is to get a guy for 5 years and really develop him. They've done that with a number of younger players in the first round recently. I think another that I think I've kind of not talked myself into, but is Emeka Egbuka. I think that I've long felt like there's an argument for teams like the Ravens, who have their quarterback and have a lot of elite talent on their roster, to target high floor players, especially when they're consistently drafting late in the first round. Target high floor players that can come in and contribute for all 4 years, potentially 5 of their rookie contract. And I think Egbuka profiles as that. He has some of the intangibles that the Ravens are looking for, especially willing to dig out guys as a blocker, that kind of thing. So he's a guy to be okay with. I would not like Luther Burden. I don't think Burden has, some of the secondary receiving qualities I'm looking for in a Ravens receiver. I think there's much better value later day 2 and day 3 at receiver if you can't get Golden or Egbuka. I trying to think of who else I really wouldn't want to see in that first round pick. Certainly not a running back, but I don't really think that's in play. Booker, I think he's a good fit to a slightly gap heavier scheme that the Ravens have. But I just would be surprised by the Ravens. I think the Ravens would be more likely to take like a Jihad Campbell if he were to fall there, an Alabama linebacker, than to take a guard. Jared, you're not a big fan of that. You wouldn't be a big fan of that one.
All right, look, I like Jihad Campbell. I think he's easily the best linebacker in this class. But I know Trent Simpson struggled last year, but it personally would be a pick it just would be a little bit too rich for me. Like go improve that defensive line, go improve the offensive line, get yourself a free safety. I get he's a good player, but just me personally, I wouldn't be just too excited about that.
Yeah, I agree that there are definitely better things they can do. One thing I'm going to say, just for the purposes of our stream, I'm going to be the draft master. I have a tracker up on mine, and I'll announce picks as they come in. That way we don't have to worry about people watching on different streams and using different trackers and so on and so forth. So once I believe the Titans are on the clock, did Goodell come out yet? I'm gonna see if the draft itself is actually open yet. They're usually always running just a little bit late. So I'm also curious. We've kind of touched on some of the same positions: defensive line, safety. In our discussions about the Ravens' first round picks, is what positions are you looking for them to address throughout this draft? What are kind of your top 2 or 3 priorities?
For me, I think it's definitely the defensive line, either edge or interior. I think if you look at the Ravens, I think that's just a big need. I know Kyle Van Noy and Dafe Owe are good players. I think defensive line is really really thin right now with Michael Pierce retiring, and I think you look towards the future. Travis Jones is up for a contract after this year. They have still Matabwike, they still have Project Washington, they still have players that they like. But defensive line, edge are definitely 2 positions that I think they're going to target early. And I think safety. I would really love Xavier Watts in the second. I do not know if they're going to be able to get him though. There's a lot of there's a lot of teams that need they need safeties. And there's not a lot of free safeties in this class. I'm not sure if he can get to the second, but if he's in there second, I would love it.
Yeah, I think I feel that way about Watts too. I think Andrew Makuba is a guy I'd actually be willing to take at 59. I think that he's a very solid coverage safety that the Ravens would like. My big sleeper in this class is Malachi Moore. Jared, I think we may have discussed him on a previous podcast, but I think he brings exactly the skill set that the Ravens need out of this draft. It's interesting to me that he played nickel primarily at Alabama before moving back to a more traditional deep safety role this past season. And that's when he played his best football. And that's exactly what I'm looking to fill in the Ravens defense right now. John, what about you? What are the positions you're prioritizing? Oh, John, can't quite hear you. While John's figuring that out, I'll talk about the positions. Like I said, free safety, defensive line. I think it is a fairly deep class to find a kind of prototypical left tackle on day 3 that you can draft and develop and has a few years to develop behind Ronnie Stanley. I think the other very interesting position to watch will be the Ravens looking at tight ends. They love tight ends, but they do have their same room back from last year. And so, without a Mark Andrews trade, without an Isaiah Likely trade, there doesn't seem to be room. I'm also lower on this tight ends class than a lot of people. I really like LSU's Mason Taylor, but I'm not nearly as high on a lot of the other players like Harold Fannin. I really like Taylor and Terrence Ferguson, but I don't think the Ravens just can afford to use a premium pick. John, how you doing now?
You all set? Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you. It's on a little bit of delay, but I can hear you.
Okay. I mean, positions of need for me definitely would have to be, like I addressed early, D-line, get the pass rush, beef up the middle of the defensive line. And then, I don't know, like we were talking, safety, Xavier Watts is a big guy on my board. I mean, I'm a big Notre Dame fan as well, so I've watched Watts since day one. I know what he's capable of, get a nice ball hawk in the secondary. And then, a sleeper, Jared brought up Trenton Simpson earlier, but a nice development guy would be Sean Dolick from UB. I mean, the kid put up numbers all season. He was PFF's #1 linebacker. Very underrated. I mean, didn't get invited to a single Senior Bowl this year, nothing. Definitely a guy that I would keep an eye on. So, I mean, linebacker would probably be rounds 4 or 5 for me, but in the first 2, I'm definitely looking to address that defensive line and the secondary first and foremost.
Yeah, I think cornerback is a sneaky option for the Ravens with the 27th pick, just because they can never have too many cornerbacks. And Awuzi's on a 1-year deal that I would be surprised if this was a multi-year partnership they're looking for. I think they like TJ Tampa. But again, I just think the way that this board could fall based on talent and positional value, I just think that the quarterback could be the best player at 27. Trey Amos out of Mississippi is a guy I like. And Maxwell Hairston out of Kentucky got invited to the draft. And I will say they really try to avoid inviting players to the draft that aren't going to get picked in the first round. And so Hairston has kind of a Nate Wigginsy profile. I've really noticed that when I compared their combine performances, their relative athletic scores. And it's, he's not quite as young, but he's not quite as polished as Wiggins. But I think in this class, he could be the kind of player the Ravens target. He's exactly the kind they targeted at the position last year. So it looks like Goodell is opening up the draft, and we'll put the Titans on the clock. And with that, I kind of wanted to talk about some of the players that, following the Ravens so closely, we don't end up talking about as much during draft season. Obviously, there's a number of exciting players at the top of the draft class. For me, none more so than Travis Hunter. It looks like he's going to be a Brown unless the Browns trade back from number 2 somehow. I'm seeing like the Broncos are trying to move up to number 2, and the Broncos are trying to move in the top 10. The Jaguars are trying to move to 2. So we'll see exactly what happens there. If the Browns trade back from 2, I would be really excited because that would mean they don't get Travis Hunter, who is quite literally the definition of a generational prospect. He only comes around once in a generation. The last guy I can't even really remember a player in the previous generation that had his potential at 2 positions. So what are some of the players in the top 10 that you're really, that you'd like to talk about, that you just don't get a chance to talk about as much because you're, focused on the Ravens?
Well, obviously, I think for me, obviously, like the top players in this draft, I think are awesome. I think Cam Ward's easily the best quarterback in this draft class, even though it's not that big of a draft class for quarterbacks. Obviously, I think Travis Hunter is that generational player. I do like him better as a wide receiver than a corner, especially if he does go to the Browns. I think their cornerback room is kind of crowded right now, even though I don't think Martin Emerson had that good of a year last year, and Greg Newsome is kind of banged up a lot. Same with Denzel Ward. I do think they would use him more as a wide receiver year 1 than corner. I know Travis Hunter has come out and said some wild quotes saying about like if I'm not a 2-way player, I'm basically not entering into the league, which is insane, by the way. But obviously, Travis Hunter is a great player, but if there is a player that I am higher on, I think a lot of other people in this process is a player that I've heard might be dropping tonight. It's Ted McMillan. I really don't get why people don't like Ted McMillan. I get maybe he's not an elite level athlete. Maybe he's not like the smoothest route runner in the world. But the dude is easily the best wide receiver in this draft class, and I'm tired of. I mean, if you don't count Hunter as a wide receiver, I guess you could say that. But like pure wide receiver, I think it's easily Ted. And I don't know why people aren't talking about his potential fall in the draft. It's just like being so odd, and it just seems like it's a bunch of smoke.
Yeah, I like McMillan. I think obviously if he fell to 27, I would run that card up. I think I think his floor is 12 to the Cowboys. I think if he gets to the Cowboys, they take him. I think the Saints are probably one of the main threats to take him before then. Maybe the Jaguars, but it seems like they want to take Ashton Genty more, who I think I love Ashton Genty, but I think, the thing that gets me about Travis Hunter is that, Saquon Barkley came out in the draft just a couple years ago. And, that's why guys like Ashton Genty aren't actually generational. There are a lot of really, really good running backs that feel like they're once in every 10 years. Well, Barkley came out less than 10 years ago. Hunter is, I am so annoyed that it seems like it's going to be that the Browns pick him and the Ravens have to play against him for the next at least 5 years. because I think he I just think he's going to be an incredible player in the NFL. I think especially once he's surrounded by more talent, and it's not so easy to just go after other players in the defense and avoid him. I think he's going to be amazing. So I'm curious to see what they do with him in terms of playing both ways. So I think in Cleveland, he'd be a wide receiver primarily, but I'm not sure I understand how you are a part-time cornerback and a full-time receiver. It seems like schematically the reverse would make more sense where you're playing cornerback full-time and you're coming in on like obvious passing downs, second and longs, third downs as a receiver. John, who are some of the top prospects in this year's class that probably won't fall to the Ravens, and you're not really talking about them in terms of the Ravens, but you just really like them as a prospect?
That'd have to be Abdul Carter. I mean, the dude's a freak athlete. You talk about getting to the quarterback. I mean, outside of Carter, I'd probably have to say I don't understand the Jackson Dart hype. I mean, if we're talking about guys who are just randomly flying up boards, it would definitely have to be Jackson Dart. I mean, I guess it's him and Milrow. If you're looking at the two weird jumping up boards, Milrow with the whole, oh, he's faster than Lamar, more athletic than Lamar. Enough with that. I mean, that's not true at all. Watch the game. I mean, just watch the tape. Two completely different quarterbacks, in my opinion. But I mean, outside of just the fact that I wish the Ravens could get Abdul Carter, I guess the two most intriguing for me would definitely have to be Milrow and Dart. And just in the last week, how much we've watched the two of them fly up boards. I mean, you were talking earlier about guys getting invited to the draft, and Milrow has been the topic of conversation on Good Morning Football about that all week long.
Yeah, I think I'm higher on Milrow than I am on Dart. I'm higher on Milrow than I think most are. But I do think that he's a late first round dart thrower if you really have a plan. So much is about landing spot, and I think we saw with Anthony Richardson that you have guys that have these really tantalizing size, speed, arm combos at quarterback. But unless you've seen them operate in college, the way that guys like Lamar Jackson operate in college, and I was talking with someone about this earlier today, how really crazy it was that he fell after that college career he had, and the tape that he put together, it was very clearly that of an NFL, starting quarterback. Milrow's tape does not look like that, and that's fine. And it felt like the Colts were really expecting Richardson to catch on very quickly, and that he just needed reps, but he couldn't stay healthy. And I think it's more nuanced than that. I think having him in a scheme that fits him is really important. And I think I would rather take a gamble on him and his upside rather than Dart, who I think is more schematically limited. I think there's a lot more you have to do for Dart. Obviously quarterbacks are what everyone's watching tonight. And the pick is in on Tennessee. It is Cam Ward. That is not a surprise. I don't think anyone's surprised by that. He's a top quarterback in a weaker class. If I were the Titans, I would take the guy that can do what no one else can and get a quarterback next year. But they clearly landed on this a long time ago. Any particularly thoughts on this pick, guys?
No, but we have some huge news, Nikhil.
What's the huge news?
We have a trade up. Jaguars.
The Jaguars from 5 traded up to 2. So that
like
seems
Travis
like
Hunter will not. They will not. He looks like Travis Hunter will not be playing in our division.
And that would be really exciting for me because I've been dreading about that. I've been dreading that. I'm not seeing this reported. Oh, no, I'm seeing this reported now. So it looks like the Browns are trading back to pick number 5. So that is going to put them in a position to get Travis Hunter, which is super exciting. Got a question from, I think that's probably Tony on the Rush Street Report account, asking if we have a preference between Starks and Emenwari. I think Jared and I both talked about preferring Starks to Emenwari. I definitely like Simmons out of him, Booker, and Zabel. I think for me it would go Simmons, Booker, and then Zabel. Zabel again would just really surprise me. It's just not a very Ravensy pick, based on what Eric DeCosta has prioritized as general manager. John, what about you? Starks or Emin, and then between Booker, Josh Simmons, and Gray Zabel?
Definitely Starks over Emin. I mean, just like Jared said, the film for me on Emin, I don't see the Kyle Hamilton comparisons. I definitely see the explosiveness. I don't see the guy who is a Swiss Army knife for a defense where you can just throw him in any position and he's going to go do what he needs to do. And then as far as the O line, I mean, I'm a little bit higher on Booker than I think you two are, which everybody's own opinion. And I would definitely say Booker, Zabel, and then Simmons. Simmons, like you were talking about earlier, I think it was you, Nikhil, his knee injury. I also like Zabel's ability to play both guard and tackle and play at an efficient level.
Yeah, and I think that's the big question about Zabel. I'm just not sure that he is. He's got 32-inch arms, and I think that is below the range that I think athleticism can make up for. I think athleticism can make up for like 33-inch arms. That's kind of my low end if he has enough athleticism to make up for it. And so even though Zabel does have good movement skills, I think he could be maybe he could play right tackle, but on the blind side, I think I worry a little bit more, and I would prefer to find someone in this draft who can take over for Ronnie Stanley in the long term. So seeing the Browns trade back here is pretty exciting as a Ravens fan, not having to play Travis Hunter anymore. Travis Hunter, like I said, I was trying to figure out how do you game plan against that? I think do you try to attack him and wear him down over the course of a game? I think that's going to be an interesting question for coordinators on both sides of the ball. You guys think the Jaguars are going to go ahead and take Travis Hunter here?
I think it's almost a given that it's got to be him or Abdul Carter. I don't think Trayvon Walker has lived up to what they were looking for as far as pass rush. But I mean, just like you're saying, you're talking about a once in a lifetime athlete. I don't think you're trading up from. I don't know what they gave up in return to move up to 2, but I don't see you moving up and sending some more packages if you're not going to grab a guy like Travis Hunter.
Yeah, I know the Genty, they were increasingly linked to Genty, but I also kept reading they wanted an offensive playmaker, not just a running back, and to me that kept screaming that they were going to go up and get Hunter. New head coach, that they really did a lot to get him to go there. And so I think then if he really seizes on Travis Hunter, that they're going to go up and get him. I'm seeing here the Jaguars gave up the 5th, their 36th. They're in the second round, a 4th rounder, and a 2026 first round pick. So pretty expensive to move up 3 picks. You gave up a very early second and I believe a late 4th and a first round pick next year. I guess in a way the Jaguars are probably counting on being a lot better next year, which I'm not sure I would count on if I were them. I'm also seeing a couple things. The Giants offered this year's first, next year's first, and multiple other picks in exchange for the number 1 pick to try and go up from 3 to 1 to get Cam Ward. But the Titans liked him too much. And also that the Browns are expected to take Mason Graham with pick number 5, which is, obviously a very good player, but not on the level of I'm annoyed that I have to face this guy for 5 years that Travis Hunter is. So clock ticking time for the Jags here. After that, it's the Giants. John, I guess you would expect the Giants to jump at Abdul Carter at that point, right?
I mean, that's been the talk. Seems like for the past couple of days, team him up with Thibodeau and Brian Burns. I don't see the Giants, especially after getting Russell Wilson and Jameis, although those are not long-term options. I don't see them taking Shedeur at 3. I think Shedeur is going to be an interesting quarterback to watch as far as if anybody decides to trade up and take him. But I don't know. I see the Giants going Abdul Carter here. I don't see them passing up on getting that premier pass rusher.
Yeah, I think I think they are really trying to they've already tried to look into a late first round pick, moving up from the late first round pick. They've been kind of in no man's land to me this whole time because you can't get the QB you want. You can't get the obvious generational prospect. And as good as Abdul Carter is, they have edges. And I think he wouldn't have a ton of snaps right away. They'd have to rotate guys. And that's fine. I don't think it's worth passing up on a prospect like Abdul Carter is, but it's not the best outcome. There were two very clearly better outcomes, in my opinion, for the Giants. And I think I was reading an article about like one of their close wins last season is what really kept them from getting this pick. And it just shows what happens sometimes when you're not fully sure what you want to do as an organization. So, yeah, I agree. It's Carter. Maybe they try and trade back, but I still think it's more likely they come up to get Shador from the top of the second round to the back of the first round. I'm very curious to see if he drops past the Steelers. They're one of the most intriguing teams to me because they want a defensive lineman and a running back, but they also seem to like Dart and Sanders. So it's, it would be hard for them to trade up from their second round pick. So I'm not sure why they wouldn't just take the quarterback they like at 21 unless they really feel like someone's going to fall or they really like, getting someone on day 2. But, for a franchise that struggled to find consistency at quarterback since Ben Roethlisberger retired, I would just be surprised at an approach that prioritized, especially running back over quarterback. So, does look like the pick for the Jaguars is Travis Hunter. So the Giants are on the clock. I think that's going to be Carter. And then I think the top 10, it's probably going to be Campbell at 4. But then I think the top 10 could really go in a number of ways from there. So with the Browns trading back, I think there was kind of an interesting scenario in which they take Hunter and then maybe try to trade up from the second round to try and take Sanders and reunite them. I think that was could have been an interesting scenario. But other than that, I think we'll see Campbell, Mason Graham come off the board. And that leaves Ashton Genty to fall actually down to number 6 to the Raiders, which was the place where he was mocked for so long until the Jaguars' interest took off. So it just goes to show, I would say, the value of being willing to stay put. Because as much as I like the Jaguars going to get their guy, that is still a lot of value to give up in the first few years of a head coach's regime, right when Trevor Lawrence's cap hits are starting to get higher and Josh Allen's contract is really expensive. So Hunter is, I think, the one player in which that's a valuable allocation of resources because he can fill multiple roles on your offense and defense. But that means you got to have a plan to use him, and he's got to not get hurt. And I think he avoided that in college successfully, but the NFL is a different game. And so I think that's the other main concern is the durability. You guys expecting any more surprises within the top 10?
Well, I've heard a lot of rumors today from official sources that so many teams are trying to be aggressive and trying to trade up. We've heard that 2 teams I've heard are really trying to be aggressive outside the Jaguars were the Texans and were the Broncos. I don't know exactly for what, but apparently those 2 teams have been super aggressive in trying to trade up. I think the question for you guys is if it is a huge haul, do you think the Patriots do trade down out of 4?
So let's look at things the way they are now, right? Let's assume that Carter goes to the Giants at 3. That moves the Patriots at 4 can take Genty or they can take Campbell. The Browns seems like they're going to take Mason Graham. At least that was one report that I saw. Genty to the Raiders at 6. The Jets, I don't think they would take Will Graham. It seems like they want to take Jahdae Barron, maybe Tyler Warren. So it depends on how far down you trade. You might be able to get Will Campbell as late as, say, number 9, but I'd be a little surprised if he slid past the Bears at 10. They told him he will play left tackle if he falls to them, and I think they're really hoping he or Genty falls to them. I don't think either will. So I think if I'm the Patriots, I wouldn't trade back farther than pick number 9 if Will Campbell is the guy I really, really still want to get.
Yeah, I think New England's got pretty much 2 obvious needs, O-line and despite the Diggs signing, receiver. I agree. I wouldn't trade outside of 9. Make sure you're still going to get one of the top 2 linemen, and I don't think the receiver class is worth writing home about. I mean, you can get some guys like Jaden Higgins. You can get look at him later on in the first round, maybe early second round if you want to use your second round pick on a receiver. But yeah, I agree. I wouldn't trade outside the top 10 and make sure that they're still getting their top lineman to keep Drake May up.
Yep, and seeing Travis Hunter walk out here, I wonder. I wonder on the player side, right? With he's probably talked to the Jaguars. He's got to know they have interest. But at what point does he know that they're going to come up and get him, and are they looking to come up and get him? I wonder how much communication they have with prospects. He seems really excited. I would be excited to not be going to the Browns as a wide receiver right now. So getting to catch passes from Trevor Lawrence is probably honestly one of the better outcomes he could have asked for out of these first several picks here. So moves the Giants on the clock. It looks like it's going to be Abdul Carter from them. It looks like I'm seeing that reported or that pick getting presented. Let's see if my stream is behind or if my draft tracker is ahead. And that brings us to New England at 4. This is Will Campbell. Arm length be damned. I think that he's just fine in terms of having I think he's just fine. He has the athleticism to make up for arms that they're not too short. They're just on the short end of what is, the acceptable range. Jared saying, I just saw a message from you saying that Hunter didn't have any communication with the Jaguars since the combine, which that's pretty wild. That's a pretty wild coup for them to pull that off and not talk to him for a couple months to make it seem like they're not interested until the day of. Again, they still had to pay up to move up. And I think that's one of the big takeaways every time I see a trade up is what you're giving up. Is that ever really worth it? Again, for Hunter, I think in that one case it is. Very rarely though am I so confident in a prospect's not just talent, but value in the long term like Hunter that I'd be willing to do that. So I don't know how I feel about, I think Will Campbell's a pretty solid pick here for the Patriots if that's who they end up taking. I'm not sure if there's someone I would go with instead that I'm really that moved by. What about you guys? You guys are both.
I agree as well. Yeah, I was trying to unmute it. It wasn't muting. I agree as well. I'm not as big on Membu. I can't pronounce his name. He's been in the top, so I never really looked. Yeah, Membu. Not as high on him. I think he's more of a project where, again, New England, it's obvious what they need. They need offensive line help for guys that can start right away, and I think Campbell is exactly that. And they need receiver, but I don't see any receivers that outside of Travis Hunter, who's gone now, who are worth a top 4 pick.
Yeah, I think again, this is a spot where I like Jared's suggestion about trading back, because I would look to trade back here. And this is a spot that the Raiders could have tried to trade up to get Genty ahead of the Jaguars, but instead it seems like they're going to be able to sit and get their guy. Let's see. I'm going to go check my. None of these picks are surprising me as going this early. None of these were guys that, even for a second did I think could be a Raven. Maybe very brief instances early on in the draft process. I'm not sure it ever crossed my mind that Carter, Hunter, or Ward would be Ravens. Actually, that never seemed possible for me. It's one of the unfortunate things about the team consistently being so good is that sometimes, just as a matter of course, you don't really get into these really, really exciting prospects quite as much, because you just know there's no chance they're going to be there. I mean, from 2023, we knew where Hunter was going to be in that first year in Colorado, and then really proved it in this past year. So, like I said, it looks like the telecast as usual is a little bit behind. Abdul Carter, the pick for the Giants. It is ultimately a no-brainer. I don't think it's what they came into this process hoping was going to happen. I don't think they, and I'm a little bit impressed that this regime did not go with Shador at 3 here, and kind of bow to that pressure to get a quarterback. But I mean, these are I'm also kind of keeping track of like the divisions that these players are going to. You see NFC South in the top 10, AFC South in the top 10. These just aren't guys the Ravens are going to play that much either, to be honest. And that's good. This is, I think that's kind of one of the understated parts of the draft is that it's also your first chance to figure out who your long-term opponents are going to be. That's why I'm really, really curious what the Steelers do at 21. The Bengals at 17, I just kind of expect them to add someone in the trenches on one side or the other. The Steelers, though, man, I don't know. And that's the big rival. The Bengals may have more high-end talent, but the Steelers always seem to be the thorn in the side. Looks like the pick is in for the Steelers. It is indeed Will Campbell. Not surprised by that. Never a player I really like. I remember watching the LSU offense in 23 and marveling at how good their offensive line was. I'd love his bookend, Emory Jones Jr., to come to the Ravens on day 3. But the Browns now on the clock at pick number 5. If you were the Browns, what would you guys do here?
That's a good question, especially when you've been mocked to get Travis Hunter for as long as they have. I mean, they don't have Dalvin Cook, or not Dalvin Cook anymore. Oh my God, Nick Chubb. So I just don't see them reaching for Genty. Their O-line, I guess, maybe could use some help if you want to go after Banks and maybe beef up the D-line, but I don't know if they're going to reach for Mason Graham at 5 right now. They might need more help other than just the defensive line at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think there's an argument for just taking Genty here. That might be what I would do is just get the best possible player that you can. And I think he is I think there's like there were top three talents in this class, and Hunter, and Carter and Genty. And I think getting one of those 3 guys at 5 is pretty good value. Maybe they look for tackle of the future in Membu. They could use help at wide receiver. But I think if I were them, I would just go ahead and take the guy who is clearly the best player on the board.
Yeah, same. And I don't know how you guys feel about this, but because they picked up an extra first-round pick in next year's class, I think that they view this roster as a long-term rebuild. I know that they signed Myles Garrett, but I think they know that they're not going to be as good next year. They know that's going to be rough. So I think for them, they said, let's just trade down. Let's reevaluate ourselves. Let's just see if we can get the best player possible. And to me, that is Mason Graham at this point. I would be intrigued by Membu. I would be intrigued with Ashton Genty. But I think for the Browns, their best player would probably be Mason Graham at this point.
Yeah, I think I agree that's what they will do. I think I would take Genty. I'm pretty okay with either. I think there are a number of players that going for them, would be a reach. Like I don't, obviously if they have Njoku, they're not going to take Tyler Warren. I don't think Will Johnson's injury concerns are probably going to keep them out of cornerback. I really like Jahdae Barron. I might take him this early, but I would be surprised if they did. I do think it's going to end up being Membu. It's going to end up being Mason Graham. And once we have that confirmed, we'll talk a little bit about Graham, what he will bring to the Browns defense, and what the Ravens will have to figure out to do over the next couple of years to stop him. I mean, obviously it's all kind of preliminary based on his scouting reports coming out of college. But that would be a pretty good 1-2 combo between him and Myles Garrett on that defensive line. So. I wonder if the Browns would even look to trade back again here. If there is a team that wants to come up in front of the Raiders to get Genty, like the Bears, for example. We know the Bears seem to really like Genty. And you wonder if they would try and get up in front of the Raiders, because otherwise I think Genty could fall to the Bears if not for the Raiders.
You think there's any possibility Cleveland trades back and still gets quarterback of possibly the future in early second round, late first round?
It's one of those things where I've seen enough connections between the Browns and the quarterbacks that it wouldn't surprise me if they took one. But the fact that they've been so quiet on them all makes me feel like they don't particularly love one. If I've heard them say like good things about Dart and Milrow, I might actually think that's more of a smokescreen. But it looks like the pick is Mason Graham. As expected for the Browns. Again, glad that the Ravens don't have to face Ashton Genty, kind of like Travis Hunter again for the next 3 years. Sometimes you see these guys in college and they just look like nightmares to scheme against. And the Raiders are now on the clock now. And this one's like, this is pretty easy. I think we can all agree this is going to be Ashton Genty, right?
Yeah, this is a pretty easy pick.
I think Genty's
Pete
been
Carroll.
mocked there since the beginning.
Yeah, Pete Carroll. They traded for Geno, which I like Geno Smith, but he clearly is a quarterback that needs help around him. The Raiders, I don't know if you guys know this, but the Raiders had the worst run game in the NFL last year in terms of like run blocking and everything. And you look at their running back room and it's like Zamir White and like a couple of like other like players that are like fine, but like they're not game changers. So like this was, to me, this was always the pick.
I think the Raiders were weird. I mean, their owner was sitting there hanging out with Shador. They were mocked to grab that quarterback, and then I think getting Geno Smith completely 180 the entire outlook for them. I think it was as soon as they signed Geno, it was clear that they were going to grab Genty here at 6.
Yeah, and it's probably been a stressful week in Vegas with all the moving parts ahead of you, and especially the Jaguars. Especially the Jaguars starting to take Genty. I think this is a home run pick, especially for a first-time GM like John Spytek, who's, you can take a player. It's your first draft pick as GM. It's the 6th overall pick, and you've just traded for a quarterback that might put you in a position to be picking outside of the top 10 next year. So you got to nail this pick, and you get a player who was, in my opinion, the second most purely talented player in this draft class behind Travis Hunter. Positional value, I understand why he's not a top 3 pick because of the positional value of running back. But Genty is one of the guys that I see as a rookie, as a prospect, that I say I would want that guy for a long time. And I don't think that about a lot of running back prospects, just because of the quick deterioration, the age, and that they're not great value at super high APYs. So this should be Genty here. Broadcast continues to be super behind there. Looks like my broadcast, at least, is just announcing Goodell. Goodell is just announcing the number 4 pick, and we're already ready for number 6. So coming soon to our stream today, we'll have Greg DePalma from Our Lads. He's going to talk to us about some of the picks that have happened so far, and specifically about targets that the Ravens might have at 27. And later on in the top 10, we're going to have Brian McFarland join from Rush Street Report. He's going to talk a little bit about rookie contracts and what tonight means for the Ravens salary cap. So stay tuned for some of those guests to join us later on. In the meantime, the Jets at number 7, I think, are one of the next really interesting pivot points in this draft where they could take, Ted McMillan. They could take an offensive lineman. I've read that they're kind of debating between getting a defensive back as well. Aaron Glenn, first time head coach, played cornerback in the NFL, wants to go get a versatile guy in Jahdae Barron that he can do a lot with his defense. I think that's a little bit of an under talked about part of the draft is the factor of coaching and general manager changes during the offseason. And, not necessarily that a team promises, a new coach, they're going to get a certain guy, but that they give the coach a little bit of preferential treatment in their first draft. I think that's the case with, Will Campbell and Mike Vrabel. That's a Mike Vrabel guy in terms of leader and a culture setter of the trenches. So I think that, he still would have made sense for the Patriots at number 4, even if they didn't have Vrabel. But that's a case where having a coach like that can kind of be a tiebreaker if you're thinking about 2 different guys. So what do you guys think the Jets end up doing at number 7, since we appear to be in lockstep on number 6?
I think they're going to go with Membu. Like, if he's there, like they took Olu Fashanu last year with their top pick. I think Membu would fit in at right tackle. You get 2 young bookends, kind of like what the Lions did with their offensive line. Obviously, I think Taylor Decker. Obviously, I think their left tackle Taylor Decker was there before Dan Campbell came in, but they did not have a good right tackle before Penei Sewell came in. They built up that offensive line. Aaron Glenn understands the value of the offensive line, but I also do think that a defensive pick could very much be in play here. I just think if Mason Graham's off the board, I don't see a defensive player really worth this value. So I think they're going to go to Membu, and I think they're going to build up this offensive line first.
Yeah, I think that's probably their top candidate to go with. They seem to be curious about what Fields can bring the offense, but I'm not sure they're going to necessarily throw a ton of investment right there right away when they've already invested a lot in their offense over the years. And they know how important the offensive line is. I think they're more likely to get Membu than they are to take McMillan. It does look like the Raiders pick is Ashton Genty. Everyone can put on your surprise face now. I'm happy for you, Pete Carroll, I guess. But yeah, I think going ahead and getting Jahdae Barron, I think, for your head coach is a really good pick. I'm really high on him. He's one of my favorite players in this draft. There was a brief spell where it looked like he wasn't popular enough for them and might fall to the Ravens, but it does not look like that's going to happen now. I definitely think he's going to go in probably the first 15 picks, even though I think he's probably a top 10 talent. So, John, what about you? What do you think about the Jets?
I think O-line's definitely got to be a need for him. I mean, you're looking at Buffalo, who's won the AFC East, 4 years in a row now? I mean, they've built that defensive line in each of the last 4 drafts. They're going to get to the quarterback. So get that anchor on the O-line that's going to continue to keep Fields this year at least up and safe. If not, I mean, I'm curious to see if they do go Tyler Warren, who continuously was mocked to him, get that unicorn of a tight end prospect and get Fields another weapon as well if they decide to hold on to Breece Hall, and you can get Hall, Wilson, and Tyler Warren.
Yeah, I think Warren, I'm a little bit lower on just because I don't think he's as unbelievable as a receiver as Brock Bowers was. I know that's been a popular comp because he likes to split out in the slot, but I don't think he's just quite as skilled and talented a receiver. And I think his involvement in the Penn State offense was more out of necessity and lack of talent elsewhere in Penn State's office than it was about Warren is so much better that he should get the ball all the time, if that makes sense. So I could definitely see them taking Warren. They did let Tyler Conklin walk, and They could maybe go after Mason Taylor early in the second round. But I could definitely see them taking Warren here and just plugging him in. I think if it is Barrett, I think it's clear that Glenn got to make that call. That Glenn got to say, hey, I'm the new head coach. I know how to use versatile defensive backs, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch. Let me go ahead and get this guy and pair him with Sauce Gardner, and you kind of have this really interesting dynamic of a lockdown outside cornerback and then a guy that can line up all over the place. And that gives you a lot that you can do as a defensive coordinator in terms of just having one guy blanket one part of the field, another kind of roam around another to make plays.
And again, looking at who's in their division, New England's going to start throwing that ball a lot more with Drake May under center. You got Josh Allen chucking the ball every game. They're going to need another guy next to Sauce Gardner sooner or later. So why not go up and grab Jahdae Barron, who I agree, I think he's a lot better than I think some people are giving him credit for in this class.
Yeah, and I think like my big thing with tight ends is you got to have the weight and the ability to work in line. It's why I'm much lower on Colston Loveland than a lot of people are. Warren has that ability. I think it's something he'll need to improve on, and that's why I just think it's a little early to take him with the 7th round pick. Like I'm the top 10, I'm looking for complete players from day one, and Warren is a complete receiving tight end, but he is not a complete tight end. Barron to me is a complete player who is a plus contributor. People have talked about putting him at safety. I don't think I would actually put him at safety for that much. I would still rather keep him in the slot or outside. And the nice thing about having your number 2 cornerback be an outside or slot guy is that it gives you more flexibility with how you find your cornerback 3. So suppose a really good slot corner is available in free agency, but not a really good outside corner. Well, you can put Barron on the outside and vice versa if it's the other way around. The Ravens are kind of in that position right now with Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins. Wiggins is a pure outside guy, but Marlon Humphrey can play either. And I think that's one of the upsides. Suppose a really good nickel corner was cut by instead of Chidobe Awuzie this year, the Ravens may have gone after him and had Marlon Humphrey flip outside when they're playing in nickel. So looks we'll have to see. I think that's what I would do. I would really like Barrett in New York. Warren, I guess, is kind of an easier pick, and I think a pick that you can be a little bit more comfortable looking back on in a couple years. If he turns into Brock Bowers, but I just think the chances of that are a lot lower than people think. I may even argue for Armand Membu over Tyler Warren here because of what you were saying about locking down the right side. Because you have a left tackle and you don't have to worry about moving Membu to the left side, I particularly really like that fit in New York. I'm going to go ahead and update my big board here, taking Graham and Genty off. In my opinion, I kind of paradoxically had 11 guys I regarded as top 10 talents. I think I probably should have separated it into the 3 I had as top 3, and then the rest being the rest of the other 8 were more top 10 talents. But Tedero McMillan, Armand Membu, Jahdae Barron, Malachi Starks are my top 10 talents remaining. I also have Will Johnson in that group. Although I don't have the right information about his potential knee issue to really say if he should go in the first 10 picks, but I think he has the talent and the tape of a top 10 pick. And it is going to be Armand Membu here for the Jets with the 7th overall pick. That brings us to the Panthers at number 8. And like I said, pretty soon we'll be having Greg DePalma on from our lads. The Jets are the team that he covers. So once he's done with his responsibilities over there, he's going to come join our stream and talk to us a little bit about some prospects that the Ravens could go after at 27. The first 10 or so picks, it doesn't really tell me anything about what's going to happen for the Ravens unless there's a real surprise like a Josh Simmons going in the top 10 that rules out a potential possibility for the Ravens. But I don't mind this pick for the Jets. Like I said, Membu fitting in at right tackle really well is a big plus. that puts the Panthers in an interesting position. They could go with Tat McMillan here. They've also been linked with Jalen Walker a lot, even Walter Nolan. This to me is where teams can start doing anything. The Panthers are one of the teams that have so many needs that they could really do anything. I think the same is true of the Saints. And now that Ashton Genty is gone, I think the same is true of the Bears. The 49ers and the Cowboys, I think I see them going offensive or defensive line. But these next 3 picks really could be anything.
Oh, if you're Carolina, are you considering O-line at all? I mean, we've seen Bryce Young run for his life for the past 2 seasons. You still got a guy like Kelvin Banks sitting at the top of the board.
Yeah, I think my thing is I'm not quite as high on Banks as a top 10 pick. So I think if I really wanted to get offensive line here from the Panthers, I would try to move back. Obviously, I've said I liked Barron. I think that's a guy that they could go with. They've been linked with Jalen Walker a bunch of times. And so I think that that would be kind of an easy pick for them because there is a need on the edge. He's a guy who's checks all of the intangible boxes: character, leadership, mentality. And he's maybe not the most elite. He doesn't have the best size. He's kind of a tweener, but he has the violence, I think, to overcome that in his play style. So I think it's going to be Jalen Walker here. Going to keep updating my big board. I think I'm one guy I'm kind of curious to see if he might slip down to the Ravens is Mykel Williams. Just has felt like he has been not talked about as much throughout this process. I think Iziraku's been kind of a riser. Williams, there's nothing specific about him that he's fallen. I just think it's the lack of immediate projection as a pass rusher, and that might have teams away from him. But in terms of a late first round pick for the Ravens, he checks a lot of the boxes that they would like from an edge defender coming in to play the run early on. I believe he's still only 20 years old, got the frame that they like, got the physicality and the athleticism. I think it's just a question of him developing into a more active and diverse pass rusher that, you hope a guy like Chuck Smith can get the most out of him.
Agreed. I think him and Scorton from A&M are 2 pass rushers to keep an eye on. Who's the other one from A&M?
Shamar Stewart.
Stewart.
Yeah.
I'm not high on him. What is he? He's the 2 sacks. What did he have in the last 2 yeyears or last season alone?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sack production isn't there. We've seen Owe go from that project to being consistent at getting to the quarterback last year. I don't really think this defensive line or this pass rush is looking for essentially another Odafe Owe to try and mold into what we've gotten Owe to today.
Yeah, I do think there's the potential for Owe to just leave in free agency after this season, though. I think the Ravens signed their best draftees, but not the very good ones. And I think Owe ultimately falls in that very good category. And so you draft a guy that, doesn't need to come in and rack up sacks as a rookie, but can try and develop and maybe be a little bit more of a movable weapon given his frame and his size in the pass rush. It's a late, to me, I think that's like he would be a nice pick in the late first round. I think that I would love for him to get to the Ravens. I think that a team is going to take a gamble on his upside. It's to me, it's a little bit like Trayvon Walker, who just like athleticism, right frame, didn't have the college production. He does have the production in the NFL after a couple years. And I think people who were really, really harshly judging that pick early on are kind of having to eat their words now because he is a productive pass rusher in the NFL and he has been very good against the run. But I just think it's a matter of valuing that properly. And I think to me, that value is somewhere in the teens. It's not 1, but I also think he'd be a steal at 27. I think its value is somewhere in the teens.
Yeah. And to be fair, if Trayvon Walker was like a mid to late first round pick, which is probably where he should have gone anyway, are we even looking at that pick like a potential bust? No, we're looking at that pick like, All right, that's a solid little pick.
Yeah, again, it was the number 1 overall pick. I don't think it's an outright bust, but I do think it's obviously not the best thing they could have done with that pick at the time. And even looking back, there are clearly better players from that class. But it is not the outright absolute bust that a lot of people thought it was. And, if that's a guy that they even took at number 5, you would feel pretty good about that, given the amount of projection required and the fact that they got this production out of him in the last 2 years.
I have a little bit of a off-topic question. It's about the Giants. I just saw something that Ian Rappaport tweeted. How crazy do you think this is, the fact that the Giants picked Abdul Carter and picked up Thibodeau's 5th-year option?
I don't think it's crazy at all. I mean, guys get injured. Thibodeau, I was looking this up before the draft. Thibodeau he's not as explosive of an edge rusher as I thought he was going to be in the league, but he is coming along well. I think he had 11 and a half sacks in 23. He had fewer this year, but he was injured. They've got 3 guys that you can roll out all 3 of those guys, but it's only on obvious passing downs. I think Carter is a guy who you can, and you've seen him do this at Penn State, where he kind of does that Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons, I'm moving around behind the defensive line, and then I'm going to target the interior and do a crossover. You see some of that from Abdul Carter. That's why he's such an exciting prospect, is that you can see him, you can unleash him on passing downs in ways that you can only do with players like Garrett and Parsons. And so I think that there's potential for that. But other than that, there's injuries and keeping guys durable. I also think it means they, don't necessarily have to extend Thibodeau. Burns might be looking for an extension again by that point as well. I forget how long his contract was for. So it gives them options. I think he's just too good a player to ignore.
I think it'll be interesting to see what they do early in the second. I mean, Dable went into New York with Daniel Jones at quarterback, got him to the playoffs in his first year, and then we watched everything just seemingly fall apart. And I think he's got it to be an NFL coach. I mean, we've seen what he can do, essentially building Josh Allen to what he became with that offense. So I think they'll be an interesting team to watch early on tomorrow, or even later on tonight if they decide to. They've got 3 picks, I believe, still in the top 100. If they decide to package something up and trade up late into the first round to go grab a guy like Jackson Dart, if he's still there.
So looks like the Panthers go with Tetero and McMillan. I'm a little surprised by that. I really thought they were going to go with Walker and try and carve out their identity on the defensive side of the ball. What is that you're getting excited about there, Jared?
Nah, I was just really excited because like I mentioned on the stream, I love Tet, and this is validation for me. I viewed him as a top 10 player. He goes in the top 10. There are rumors about him falling. He does not fall. That is a great pick for Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, I think you get a guy for Bryce Young. You get a big target for Bryce Young. That's and has elite upside, which is just not something that you have in your current room. So I really do like this pick for them. For the Saints now in kind of a weird position where the best running back is gone, the best 2 receivers are gone, the best defensive tackle is gone. To me, this is where the draft is really going to start to diverge. If teams are not valuing, I don't think most teams value Starks, Will Johnson, Jahdae Barron as highly as I do. And because of that, this is where the draft really starts to diverge based on teams' individual values. I almost feel like this was close to a consensus top 8. Maybe Barron makes a consensus top 9, maybe, and Warren makes a consensus top 10. But from there, it gets really scattered. And I think both Barron and Warren are more specific positional fits that teams have to decide if they like or not. Really interesting to see McMillan. I'm sure, the Cowboys were hoping that he would get there. Next up is the Saints. At this point, I don't know what they do. I haven't seen that many links to them and a lot of other I haven't seen that many links to them and a lot of other teams, but I think they were one of the teams that was hoping that a McMillan or a Mason Graham might fall to them. They've been linked with a lot of quarterbacks, but it doesn't seem like that's going to come through either. And it looks like we do have Greg DePalma is almost ready to join us here. Just gave us the thumbs up, and we're going to go ahead and add you to the studio. Greg, a senior analyst for our lads. How are you doing today, and how has the first part of the draft progressed for you?
Well, everybody was excited about, or at least interested. We all thought maybe this would be a draft where we wouldn't see a whole lot of trade ups, and then all of a sudden, bam, the Cleveland Browns, I thought, made a very smart move. And we haven't seen a whole lot of that come out of that organization lately. But yeah, I thought that maybe set the tone for the first night of the draft.
Yeah, and I think that it seemed like the steam towards that started to build earlier today with a lot of talk about it, and the talk earlier in the week about the Jaguars wanting an offensive playmaker, not just running back, which was what people thought with them at 5 with Ashton Genty, but wanting a playmaker. Scream Travis Hunter, and I understand your focus at our lads is on the Jets. So, what do you think of the Armand Membu pick?
Well, that's my personal preference. That's my team. So, yeah, I thought last year there was a lot of talk, of course, with the Jets potentially going after a tight end, just like this year. And both years, I went with the preference of which the Jets actually decided to go in the direction of, which is offensive tackle. I think that's where the game starts. That's where it's won and lost, at the trenches. And the Jets now, on paper, if you look at their young offensive line, if everybody pans out, they have one of the better promising offensive lines in the league right now. And that's something Jet fans just haven't had very often. So, yeah, this is, I think, a very positive pick for most fans, even though I know a lot of them, would like the sexy pick. Tyler Warren is, he's got, beast capability at the next level. And, I get why they might feel that way.
Yeah, I think for me, one thing I was curious about that we were talking about the podcast was when you hire a defensive-minded head coach, especially a former NFL defensive back himself and Aaron Glenn, would they go out and go after Jahdae Barron? Probably was the best defensive back candidate for them at that point, because it looks like teams are a little uncertain about Will Johnson's knee, and thought that they might do that for their new head coach if he was a player they were really pushing for. But I certainly don't blame them. I think especially, like you said, having the bookends and not having to move Membu to the left side like some teams might have to do, I think it makes him a really, really strong pick at 7. I'm curious to hear, there are a lot of potential picks for the Ravens at number 27. We maybe can get to some of the more common picks, mocks, in a second, but who's a guy who's maybe a little bit outside of what we've seen as a really popular pick for the Ravens?
I guess if you're let's stick at edge, because there's so many edge guys that a couple of them are going to drop. And I think if that does happen, there's one guy that I really like that I think could go to the Packers and be reunited with his former college coach. And that is Donovan Ezaraku out of Boston College. Yes, he doesn't have the size, and I get that, but he makes up for that with, he's got big hand. He's got good length. He also has a really huge a very huge hand radius, which makes up for that. And so extremely productive. I know it's the ACC, but in the edge, I would take a look at someone like that who might be able to sneak in. I know some people think Shamar Stewart can go anywhere in the first round, but we love Shamar Stewart. We think we grade him as the second best edge rusher, but I see some mocks have him late in the first round. So trust me, if he's available, I think the Raven fans would be really, really happy if they can get a hold of Shamar Stewart. So that's at edge. I think the Ravens will probably get an opportunity to get the top guard available. I can't imagine one of these guards are going to go before the Ravens. I might not even see a guard taken in the first round. Keep an eye on Demetrius Knight. If the Ravens want an inside linebacker, Demetrius Knight is our top-rated inside linebacker. Most people believe that Jahad Campbell is going to be the guy that's going to get picked. And John Cooper, who's the head of our scouting department, is in love with Carson Schlesinger as well at a UCLA. So those are a couple of guys, because once you get into the back end of that first round, you can see a lot of different possibilities. Guys that you thought were going to be mid-second, late second, early second that end up in the first round. So those are a couple of players that I think you should keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think linebacker is an interesting one in this draft because the Ravens, have invested in that position heavily in recent years, trading a second rounder for Roquan Smith, using a third rounder on Trenton Simpson. Simpson didn't, spring into a starting role that they wanted to, in the way that they wanted him to last year, and they lost kind of the two experienced backups that they had spelling him towards the end of the season in Malik Harrison and Chris Board. And so I think that's why it's kind of a sneaky need for the Ravens, even just a team that prioritizes special teams. I'll be a little bit surprised if they went with the linebacker in the first round here. But if they're able to accrue more day two capital, maybe via trade back, that would allow them to prioritize position on day two. Edge rusher, I think, certainly could be a priority. And one player that's I know we were talking about kind of uncommon projection for the Ravens, but one player that's a really popular one is Malachi Starks. And I was wondering what your perspective is on him as a potential Raven, because he's long been my dream realistic pick at 27. I think he is very versatile, but his versatility is slanted a little bit more towards a deep coverage skill set. And I think that pairs really well with Kyle Hamilton, whose versatility is a little bit tilted towards making plays around the line of scrimmage. And so you can have them both patrolling deep, but I think Starks you can also have in single high shells with Hamilton playing in the box or in the slot.
And Starks is also a very capable run defender. So, he can do it all. I agree with you. If he's available, just like I said with Stewart, to me, that would be just a Christmas gift, because maybe a few years ago, a player like Starks would have went in the top 15. But the way that safeties are being looked at nowadays, this is the only explanation of why he would even be available late in the first round, because he's such a dynamic player. I mean, he's basically started right away ever since his freshman season, playing SEC football too. I mean, you got to understand, everybody, as far as what this guy's been used to playing against the top competition ever since he's been a college athlete. He's just a superior player for that position. He's got great ball skills, excellent motor, everything you want for the position. And so, yeah, is he the biggest guy? No. But the other player at that position, if you want a little bit more size, a little bit more physicality, is the kid Emenwari, who's another player who I absolutely love. And that's a guy that actually kind of reminds me a lot of Kyle Hamilton, to tell you the truth. Maybe the best hybrid DB/linebacker in this draft.
Yeah, we talked about Evan Warrior earlier. I think, the reason he would be available at 27 is I don't think he's nearly as polished or instinctive of a prospect as Hamilton was coming out of Notre Dame. I definitely see the athletic comparisons, but I guess my main concern is, and one of the concerns I've seen, is him finding a role quickly in the NFL, because there is development to do especially in terms of his deep coverage skill set. And I think that's what I'd prefer in a safety out of this draft for the Ravens. I do know Imamori is a playmaker and is really good at making plays on the ball. But in terms of consistency, that's maybe where my question is a little bit more. What would you say to that? And what have you seen from some of his film?
Well, actually, if you're looking for, if you were looking for someone to fill that role, maybe, and I'm not saying that he couldn't be a late first rounder, but Xavier Watts, I think, might fit what you're looking for more. If you're looking for the ball hawk type of deep safety guy back there, I think that's more of Watts' game than it would be for Emenwari or Starks. And you don't have to take him in the first round. Again, there's some people who believe he's even a third round guy, but it's probably a guy that the Ravens would be able to trade back and then maybe get an extra pick, and then you can still go after Watts. As far as Emenwari, I don't know if I'm really too worried about that myself. I don't think he's a player that I'd be too concerned with, that he needs a little bit of developmental time. I think the thing that I would be concerned with the Ravens is that, again, as I said, you already have that guy on your team. So I don't, because again, there's no other player that I would compare him to more than Kyle Hamilton. And I think that would be like a luxury kind of situation. I think other teams would value him as an asset a lot more than the Ravens would. And that's why if both guys are available, it's a no-brainer that you would choose Starks over Emanwari.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I think Emanwari, the Ravens at 27 in this draft particularly, that's a position where all of your first round grades could very well be gone by then. And at that point, you are looking at, some of your priority second round grades, which is why I could maybe you trade back to 32 and get Watts there. You try and trade back and get Watts because I agree it is a touch early for him, but he does fit the skill set I'd really like. A couple picks we have rolling in, the Saints taking Kelvin Banks at number 9. Some late chatter this week about him sneaking up boards, and that turned out to be true. And Colston Loveland being the first tight end off the board ahead of Tyler Warren, which is a little surprising to me. I think Warren is a little bit more built for the NFL inline work that I prioritize in a tight end, while Loveland's a little bit thinner. Greg, what are some of your thoughts on those picks?
Right off the bat with Loveland. I talked about this actually earlier today on our show, just a few hours ago, about the chatter with Loveland is now being looked as maybe on some boards ahead of Warren. And I just don't see it. And I'm a Michigan fan. I've been a Michigan fan for 45 years. And so I know more about Loveland than most people. And I think he's going to be a fantastic player at the next level. But Warren is the complete package. Now, look, they got Cole Kmet. And maybe that has something to do with it, is that they just feel that Loveland would be a better match to put those two on the field at the same time, whereas Warren wouldn't. So that's the only thing I could think of. The other thing I would think of is let's remember who was making the pick. I'm not sure. I don't understand why Pace is still there. So, well, look, I don't think the fans are going to be upset. He's a good player. And again, maybe it was just a system fit. And with Banks, Banks is a really good player. I know that he's dropped to the third offensive tackle or the third offensive lineman. I believe it's just 3 at this point. And a lot of people thought he would be the number 1 guy. He got all the accolades, deservedly so, in college. And he could play inside. He could play outside. There's a lot to like about Banks. And I think that it's not a surprise because Penning, who was their top pick a few years ago, has not really developed as planned. And so this gives him an insurance situation here. And I did not buy into the quarterback situation either. I never bought into Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart or anything like that going to the Saints. That made no sense. You could still go with Carr in 2026, worst case scenario. And why not give this kid an opportunity to play quarterback for the season, the South Carolina kid. I mean, I thought he looked pretty decent last year as a rookie. So I think they should just go ahead, take a quarterback in the 2nd round, 3rd round, 4th round, but made no sense why the Saints would use the 9th pick overall on a quarterback.
Yeah, and for Loveland, I think one thing I think of with the Bears, with Loveland for the Bears is that they already have Cole Kmet, and that will let them flex out Loveland into the slot and run some of those 12 packages with him out in the slot and use him at his best. Seeing another pick come in, Michael Williams from Georgia to San Francisco, it really felt like they were going to take an edge, and it was really just a question of which one were they going to value, and they did get the opportunity to take I believe their favorite of the second-tier edges, if Carter is in the tier of his own, as the consensus, I would say, had him. And then kind of had the second tier with the 2 guys out of Georgia, Izaraku, Stewart, and Mike Green. The 49ers go with Michael Williams here, leaving who I think is going to be Matthew Golden at the Cowboys for number 12 here. It seems like Jones, really connected with him when they met. And they, very clearly need a wide receiver. It just feels like a very Jerry Jonesy pick.
Yeah, the one thing with the Cowboys, and I thought that offensive line was also under consideration because their offensive line, that right side of the line is not starting caliber. Like it's below average at this point on both right guard and right tackle. And that's why I thought getting like a Banks might have been a good look. Connerly also fills that bill. He could play tackle. He could play guard. I mean, I get what people are saying about Golden to Cowboy. I can see that. That makes a lot of sense. But I'm just interested to find this out. And that is, Why would you give up? What did they give up? A fourth rounder for Mingo, I believe.
Yep.
Okay. That's a high pick. That's a pick that tells me that you believe he's going to start for you next year. You already have an elite number one receiver. So from their point of view, I mean, how many receivers do you need? I mean, they have so many other issues on this team. You need to have 3 top wide receivers. Again, I'm only saying from their point of view because they love this kid. I'm assuming they really like him, this Mingo kid, and think that he's going to have a second chance with them. Otherwise, why use a 4th round pick on him? So, and I wouldn't even rule the other kid out either, who actually played pretty well last year, finally stepping up a little bit. So, look, I can see it happening, no doubt about it. But I would not also be surprised if they pulled the trigger on Hampton. Everybody's talking about Genty to the Cowboys. Well, why not Hampton? You can't tell me that the Cowboys are going to go into the regular season with Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders as their first. I mean, come on. They're going to have to take a running back at some point.
Yeah, and I think, Jerry Jones was at the one end of the pendulum with using a first-round pick on Ezekiel Elliott and then paying him all that money. And then in the last couple of years, he swung all the way to the other end of the pendulum where he doesn't want to spend anything on the running back. And I think, there's a chance he swings back to the other end and realizes, well, oh, wait, we actually really need one. So that wouldn't shock me here either. Definitely an offensive pick, I think for the Cowboys there. Getting back to the Ravens a little bit, or I guess Ravens related, what do you think the Bengals and the Steelers are going to do with their first round picks? It's always interesting to figure out what the Ravens are going to have to deal with for the next 4 years.
Sure. Well, a lot of people believe that, and deservedly so, or justifiably so, is that they need to get another edge rusher. And there is no question about that. There are a ton of edge rushers available at this point. They're going to get their pick and they know who's on the board and who should be there when they go. So even if Hendrickson is around for the next year or two, you're at the point where you need even just a number 2 guy. So they don't really have that. They really have. Look, we don't know if Murphy is going to turn into, the player that they envisioned. But another thing to keep in mind is that regime does not I believe Tobin has been there for, I think, over 20 years or so. He has only, I believe, used an edge rusher in his first round pick like twice. And he just did it. So expect the Bengals to do it 2 out of 3 years. I don't know about that. So I would look at corner. I think if they can get a Starks, if they can get a Barron, Will Johnson is now available to them, and they like Michigan kids. So I think a defensive, because their defensive back was just toasted the last 2 years, and they need more help. Look, I think 2 of the guys, actually, the 2 young kids, the other Michigan kid, Turner and Hill, they actually started to play well last year, and then they got hurt. Yeah. So, but that's it. I don't know about Battle. I think he's maybe the weaker link to keep an eye on. But you put a Starks in there, or a Barron, or a Will Johnson, and any of those guys could be the best defensive back week 1 when they take the field. That's how talented they are. So as far as Pittsburgh, everybody's talking about Shedeur Sanders, and I definitely think that that's a possibility, as is, I guess, Jackson Dart or even Jalen Milroe, because we're not very high on Shedeur Sanders. And I could easily see him still being available after the Steelers, because the Steelers' number 1 goal, I believe, in this draft, besides the obvious that they need a quarterback, is they've got to add bodies on the defensive side to stop the run. Their rush defense killed them last year, and that's not Pittsburgh Steeler football. So if they target a really good, I mean, there are going to be some potential players. I mean, Nolan could still be there. Harmon could be there. I know there's some injury talk about him, even though I wouldn't believe everybody talking about injuries at this time of year. We just talked about Stewart. So they're going to have their fill. And I think it's going to be interesting, but I would not be surprised even if the Steelers passed on Sanders and instead tried to grab one of those defensive linemen.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the Steelers are in this position every year where they don't pick early enough to get a premier quarterback, and that is what they've just badly needed since the retirement of Ben Roethlisberger. Ravens fans rejoice in that a little bit, but it is a question of, if you're not going to get your quarterback via a top 15, top 10 pick, how are you going to do it? But what they will do is they will keep building that Steelers talent in the trenches. what do you think about Harmon to the Ravens? Because I've seen scouting reports that say he plays like a Raven and a Steeler. Like he really plays that NFC North defensive line style of football.
Yeah, look, the only reason that maybe a Will Johnson or a Derek Harmon will possibly last as long as they're lasting are the injury concerns. Harmon is top 10 caliber talent in this draft. And let's remember too that I think that once you started right around the 5th position in the draft, I think it's wide open when it comes to, I mean, I want to throw Genty in there. So I'll be a little bit more easy on these guys, but let's say maybe, somewhere close to the top 10 till about 30 of the first round, there's not a lot of difference in the talent of these kids. So I think in saying that, there are going to be players like Harmon that will be nitpicked because they've got this little injury concern possibility, or Will Johnson's got this other concern. And there are some other guys that are pretty close talent-wise. So let's just go ahead and pass on that guy. But just getting back to Harmon, yeah, I think he's a player that could have gone, say, to the Dolphins, or he's a guy that could end up, just like we talked about with Baltimore, as could be Shamar Stewart, as I mentioned too. So yeah, he's a really good football player. Again, I think that knowing the way the Ravens draft, this seems to happen every year from an outside perspective. They always seem to land and get the benefit of, and they're smart enough to take advantage of players that drop and fall on their lap and say, thank you very much. And guys like we just talked about, especially whether it's a Starks or a Harmon, if one of those guys are available, or a Stewart, I can see the Ravens being the beneficiary of that once again.
Yeah, it's funny you name those two guys because those are my top 2 picks as realistic best case scenarios for the Ravens. Was one of the 2 of them falling. I really like Josh Simmons and think without that knee injury he would probably be with those top 3 left tackles, but. This is the thing on the outside looking in during the draft is you really don't know what the deal is with knee injuries, especially with knee injuries. The same thing's happening with Will Johnson right now. So Simmons is another guy who I think maybe falls to the Ravens, and I don't think it's ever too early to start looking for a long-term replacement for Ronnie Stanley, even though they just re-signed him. I think that it is so hard to find talented left tackles, and you might have to take a shot on one coming off an injury who otherwise would not have fallen to you. So that's a name I've looked at, and you already mentioned Izuraku, and he's kind of, I think he belongs in that second group of edges, even though he's more considered towards the end of the first. What are your thoughts on Simmons? I'm curious.
Yeah, you mentioned it. The fact that he was able to shoot out to tackle and play as well as he did, it really wasn't a drop off. But he's definitely better suited at guard. There's no question about that. He's our top rated guard. I don't really say that there'd be a big difference though, like a wide margin. You got Booker kind of like right behind him, but the biggest difference, of course, is Booker. It all depends on what the Ravens want. I remember a few years ago when Linderbaum was taken, I remember doing some research and trying to figure out, how everybody goes offensive line. They say, okay, well, if this offensive lineman is more not finesse, but he's more, he's more for a power run blocking game instead of a wide zone game. Then you would say, okay, well, Linderbaum, he fits with the zone play. Well, the Ravens want power offensive linemen, which was always what I had heard. Linderbaum is not going to fit with the Ravens because that's just not, it's a completely different type of player. But the fact of the matter is, if a player is as good as Linderbaum is, it don't matter. It don't matter where he gets drafted. And that was a lesson that I learned. And I think that's something that I think anybody out there that tries to predict mock drafts and where players fit, like Booker, my point was going to be that Booker is that road grader type of player. And I know that the Ravens, of course, again, still kind of had that philosophy. But Simmons is a little bit better because of, again, and you're always going to get this with these linemen. If they're a little bit more versatile, it's always going to give him a leg up on the other guy. Also, Booker didn't have like the best combine or measurables. So there's a little bit of knock on that. It's almost like he's like a one-trick pony type of guy, like a mauler. And for that case, I think Simmons has an edge there as well.
Yeah, and a couple of things. One, the late Joe D'Alessandris, the Ravens offensive line coach, I talked to him during training camp last year because the Ravens always seem to develop versatility in their linemen and really prioritize that. He said that that's something that they, take into consideration because it's going to help a player's career. Look at a guy like Patrick McCary and him getting $13 million a year, I think, from the Jaguars. Which is a lot of money for a guy who went on as an undrafted offensive lineman. You really don't see that very often. And so they really prioritize versatility. But a big pick here pertaining the Ravens is Tyler Booker to the Cowboys. And you were just talking about him. I think that's very early to take a guard. I think that's very early to take a guard who,
Wow.
to me, doesn't project as that scheme versatile like you were just talking about. I don't think he is so good of a player that he's worth taking this high at number 12. This is quite a surprise from the Cowboys.
RJ Ochoa, who covers the Cowboys and is our insider for the past few years, and I've talked to him, of course, the last few months. We did the offseason preview, and he's talking about just how things have gone and Cowboy fans and the feeling about what they don't understand what Jerry Jones is doing. And they really are kind of flabbergasted at this point with all of the moves he's been making lately. And this is just another one. This is going to kill their fan base. This makes no sense. Like you said. Now, look, as I said, at this point, players are interchangeable. They can go in the top 15 and maybe, but not, this is ridiculous. The guards generally don't even go in the top 15 unless they're a top tier special player, which Booker is not. This is a guy that they could have gotten at the end of the first round and they could have traded back, accumulated more picks. I would have just accepted like a fifth or fourth round pick, even though I know I could have gotten more. Like just can I move back a spot and get an extra pick? So this makes no sense, especially because they needed more help at tackle. I guess that maybe they'll pick a tackle in the next round. I got no idea. But yeah, without the versatility, we know they needed a guard. That was 100%, but this is not good. This is not good for Cowboys fans, and this is really going to start really making them mad.
Yeah, Matthew Golden, who I thought they may pick, would be a very Jonesy, Jerry Jones move in a positive connotation. This is a very Jerry Jones move with a negative connotation. To me, I think it is possible we look back on this pick and say, well, the Cowboys got a 5-year above average starter at guard, and maybe compared to some of the other outcomes in this class, it's not the worst thing in the world. But I still think that 12th overall is just too rich for me with Booker's talent level. And to me, particularly, it is the lack of scheme versatility and the fact that he is so much a better fit in a gap-oriented scheme than a zone one. And obviously, zone is so much more prominent in the NFL. I don't have a super familiar understanding of Schottenheimer's scheme. But to my understanding, it seems like it's more of a zone-based scheme. Although those are two very power gap-oriented guards they have now. Was it Tyler Smith and Tyler Booker now, the two Tyler guards in Dallas?
And don't they have Tyler Guyton too?
Yeah, Tyler Guyton at left tackle, who I did not like either. Maybe I'm completely out of sync with the Cowboys offensive line evaluation because I did not like his pick either. I was very happy when they took him in front of the Ravens and let Wiggins fall to them last year.
Well, I feel the only thing that the Cowboys are prioritizing there has got to be his pass pro. The run blocking isn't there, but we are talking about a team who, obviously Kellen Moore, when he was the OC, they were throwing the ball a lot more than they were last season. Run game wasn't there last year, but they also didn't have the backs to run the ball. So, I guess at the end of the day, the only thing I'm looking at as far as taking Booker at 12 is they just really prioritize that pass protection more than anything else.
Yeah, that's what people don't I think they forget with Schottenheimer is that when he was with the Jets, he actually did a much better job than people think. They ranked as the number one rushing offense in the NFL the year that they went to the AFC Championship game and they lost with a rookie quarterback, Mark Sanchez. And that was pretty neat to be able to pull that off. But everybody knows that you have to run the ball with a rookie quarterback. So yeah, he's a much better coach than given credit for. But yeah, you can't look. My pick was Banks. I thought Banks would be there, and I thought they would go offensive line, but Banks and Booker, I mean, there's just no comparison. So yeah, if you want to pick and zero win, especially because of the Cowboys, if you want to pick one team and one draft pick that is going to get all the news and all the scrutiny, we just landed on it.
Yeah, I was going to say there were no real Michael Penix-esque huge shockers in the top 10. Obviously, the Jaguars moving up for Hunter is a surprise, but it's only the move up that's the surprise, not the player or even the team that was targeting him. It's just that it happened. Everything else in the top 10 has gone fairly chalk. No big surprises. Banks and Loveland are on the smaller side of surprises, and I agree. I think Banks would have been a really, really strong, sensible pick for the Cowboys here that they just didn't end up going with. Looks like the Dolphins are now on the clock. This is one of the things about Starks that I think he has a chance to get there is just the teams between now and the Ravens. I'd just be surprised if they prioritize safety, either because the ones that care about the position already have invested in it. The Buccaneers have Winfield, for example, or the teams don't care about it as much and deprioritize this position and could let him fall there. Looks like Kenneth Grant is going to be the pick for Miami. For Miami. Not surprised by that in the slightest. They needed a defensive lineman after losing so many defensive linemen this offseason. I still think I prefer Derek Harmon to Kenneth Grant, but Grant does have that size, that nose tackle, space eating capability that maybe helps out a little bit when you don't have as much depth along your defensive line. Having a nose that can eat space in the middle, eat double teams is a pretty good pick. And this leaves kind of similarly to what happened with the Raiders and Ashton Genty, Tyler Warren to fall free and clear to the Colts.
They're having a party.
Yeah.
Colt fans are all psyched. Also because the tight end was picked. And it wasn't, look, maybe they would have still been okay. And I think they would have if it would have been Loveland. But this is even better if you're a Colts fan. I mean, did they even already make the pick? I mean, they're probably tripping on themselves going up there and getting a pick in. I mean, come on.
Yeah, no, I think on my telecast right now, I think the Dolphins are still on the clock, but on the tracker I'm watching, they've picked Grant. So
okay, so
the
they're
Colts
not there
probably
yet.
going to run in their pick. The Falcons, I'm then expecting to take an edge.
Yep.
I'm not really sure who that edge would be. I've heard James Pierce Jr. I've heard Mike Green. Stewart is still there.
They like Jalen Carter
is still there. Jalen Walker, I think, is
Jalen Walker. I mean, yes, yeah. Absolutely.
I think maybe the Falcons weren't expecting him maybe to fall to them, and the Colts ran that pick right in. It's Tyler Warren, not surprised at all.
Good for them.
So I think this probably goes Jalen Walker here for the Falcons, especially since Raheem Morris could use him in some versatile ways if he wanted to. He doesn't have to always just send him off the edge every time. He does have, the movement skills to drop off the line of scrimmage and do more than just be a pure edge rusher. So it's kind of interesting to see these middle picks be so expected, 13, 14, and 15. That's usually where things start to kind of diverge a lot, and where you see some of the biggest reaches, although I guess the Cowboys took care of that for us at number 12.
And the player that right now seems to be dropping the most, and again, yes, the injury situation is there, and that's Will Johnson. Look, I'm a Michigan guy. I've watched this kid play every single game of his college career, and unless the injury is some sort of career-threatening deal, which maybe it is, I don't know. You get obviously every team checks you out. Every doctor's different. Everybody has different advice. If this kid is clean and never has to worry about an injury, he's a day one lockdown superstar shutdown corner. And I think any team that needs a corner that passes on him better be right that there's something wrong with him medically, or else they're gonna just regret the day that they did not take the chance on this kid.
Yeah, Greg, I agree. My bad. I agree as well. I'm the same way with Benjamin Morrison. I mean, there's talks of teams taking gambles on Siobhan Revel. At the end of the day, I mean, you're talking about Will Johnson. It reminds me a lot of Kyle Hamilton. I mean, you're a Michigan guy. I'm a Notre Dame guy. So I've watched these dudes since they were in their freshman years. Hamilton was always a consensus to me, top 10 pick.
Oh,
he
yeah.
falls because of a slow 40 time. Last year, we saw Will Johnson, Benjamin Morrison, consensus top 15 picks, and all of
Yeah,
a sudden,
right.
just injuries. Then all of a sudden, they're falling behind other guys
Yeah.
on boards.
Yeah.
McKeel's big on Jade Barron. For me, it's not in order, but Barron, Johnson, and Morrison. I think those are the three most versatile corners in the class.
Yeah, you hit it on the head with Morrison. You know, look, even our lads, with every single player, no matter how dominant they are, they will write some things that every player needs to improve on. And you can say that about Johnson and Morrison as well. But I don't care about any of that stuff. Once with Morrison, it's the same thing. Does he check out? Is he going to be okay? Because if he is, I mean, what am I missing about what I saw with my eyes watching this kid play college football? What changed other than he got hurt? I don't get it. I'm sorry. And how many? And with medical that we have today, that's just not an issue anymore. Nobody cares about whether a player got hurt in college unless they think it is a career threatening type of lingering injury. That's the only thing that should hamper anybody from taking a player as talented as either Will Johnson or Benjamin Morrison. So whoever gets Benjamin Morrison in the second round or the third round is getting a major steal.
Yeah,
I think
he's a
Cincinnati's
guy.
gonna be a team to keep an eye on for Morrison.
You think Cincinnati? You said.
I think Cincinnati's going to be a team to keep an eye on for Morrison or Watts, with Al Golden getting hired there this offseason. I think he's going to try to pair at least one of the two guys that he pretty much just shined with at Notre Dame these past couple seasons.
And he could probably pick him up in the second round, the way things are going.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly, that's exactly how it's looking.
Yeah, like I said, the Colts did pick Tyler Warren as expected. I really agree with Morrison. I love Morrison. I would love him at the end of the second round for the Ravens as, you know, a very versatile cornerback too, opposite Wiggins in the long term. He could even push for an outside role early on in Baltimore with Humphrey in the slot, and could see that trio going into 26 and maybe even beyond if they extend Marlon Humphrey. So would like Morrison there. I mean, obviously, if Barron, Will Johnson, Malachi Starks fall to the Ravens at 27, I'm really ecstatic with any of those three picks. I think those are three great fits on their defense. You know, it doesn't feel like secondary is a huge need because they're returning 4 starters and they added a Woozy to start as well. But I think it's clearly something, you know, both Ardarius Washington's a free agent after this year. So is a Woozy. Clearly something I'd love them to prioritize in the long term, and clearly a position group they continually prioritize in the draft. So it seems like we are inching more and more towards the Ravens getting a highly coveted defensive back at 27, but still a long ways to go.
Yeah, if just speaking of corners and safeties, and I'm going to go on value only based on our lads. We'll let you know where they believe the players should get drafted, and so I will consider these players that are our lads graded either round 3, 4, or higher. And if I'm just looking at corner and safety, 2 guys that I like the most, one of each that will be available again right around the third round potentially. This is just the way our lads thinks, or the fourth. Would be at corner would be Kobe Bryant from Kansas and Hunter Waller, their safety at Wisconsin. I think those 2 kids have some really good upside considering where they're going to get drafted. So those are a couple of guys that I also really like the Shamari Simmons kid from Arizona State, who a lot of people think is going to go late in the draft and maybe even may not get drafted at all, which I'm just very surprised by. Those are a couple of players that you might want to keep an eye on, since you were talking again, value guys a little bit later on in the secondary.
Yeah, I think, you know, having a starting 5 locked down for this year means you don't have to overdraft that. And I think that's the position the Ravens try to put themselves in every year by addressing their key needs in free agency. They're never in a position where they have to reach on a specific position. In fact, I think the times when they've been in that scenario before in the past have resulted in some of the lesser first-round draft picks of the Eric DeCosta era, Patrick Queen, Hollywood Brown. They got good value out of those guys in terms of playtime and in the Hollywood Brown trade, but in terms of talent, I'm not sure those guys really lived up to their first round billing. And I think that's because the Ravens put themselves in a situation in 2019 and in 2020 where they had to go get a wide receiver and a linebacker, even someone with Odafe Owe in 21. Where they really needed to go find a starting edge rusher, although they did use their first round pick that year on Rashad Bateman, who I really liked. So I think I've seen that approach shift a little bit with Eric DeCosta in the last couple of off seasons, where he's really prioritized filling those immediate needs in free agency, so they're never hamstrung by those needs in the draft, and they could really, really prioritize value and fit instead of, oh, well, we really need a guy at this position.
Some offensive linemen. You mentioned that Ronnie Stanley. You have no idea how long he's going to be around. A couple of guys to keep an eye on for value. A tackle. You got Cornelius Connerly's tackle buddy there for the Oregon Ducks, and again, it's a Rutgers guy. So I've seen this kid play every game, and I think he is one of the more underrated guys in the draft, especially at tackle, and that's Holland Pierce, the offensive tackle. I'm shocked that he's considered a 4th or 5th grade. I just believe this kid's going to be a potential. Now, maybe he needs some time. Who knows? I think he should be a plug and play type of guy. But hey, you draft a guy like that, you let him develop behind Stanley for a year, and you might be able to have a guy that can pick things right off where Stanley left off. And Caleb Etienne is another guy from BYU to keep an eye on later in the draft. I had a good conversation with one of our BYU analysts, and when they were going hot and they were undefeated, and I asked them if give me some guys from BYU. Who should we be looking for? Who should we be looking at as potential NFL guys? And he was really high on Caleb Etienne at that time, so I started to pay attention to him, and I understand exactly what he was talking about. He had a really good pro day. So those are another few tackles to keep an eye on as far as potential value guys. Maybe a little bit. We're going to mid 3rd, 4th, 5th in the draft at tackle. And I also like Luke Kandra and Jackson Slater at guard. Because I got to believe, of course, you're the Ravens experts, that they're going to be looking for potentially 2 guards. Is that even possible? You think that, or you think they'll just be satisfied with 1?
I think they'll be satisfied with 1. Depending on how you view Daniel Falele, the Ravens were persistent or stubborn with him last year. And I think it's going to be even harder to move them off of him as a starter in 2025, because he does have that year of experience under his belt, and you can feel a little bit more comfortable with him there now. And I think Andrew Voorhees is pretty easy to pencil in as the other starter. They're still very high on him because a lot of people are high on him coming out of the draft. Pre-injury, he was thought to be a potential day 2 pick. So I think kind of similar to secondary, where they'll take a guard if it's the right value at any given point, but it's not something they're going to push or force. Especially, I'd be surprised if they took 2 pure guards. I would expect, you mentioned Holland Pierce. That is a name I've had on my radar for a while as a draft and develop left tackle prospect. So taking 2 guards would surprise me a little bit. I think you could definitely see them take 1. But I think the other thing to think about is if you take a guard, he beats out Daniel Falele for a job, Daniel Falele may not get you a comp pick next year's free agency. And that is part of the calculation for the Ravens. Sometimes they have an overemphasis on comp picks. And I think not being willing to upgrade guard because you're looking for a comp pick would be an example of an overemphasis on comp picks. But I think that is, that's one of the reasons why they're comfortable with Daniel Falele as a starter. Is they hope he can go out and get starting level guard money next year in free agency and net them another 4th round pick that they can use to get the next Daniel Falele. So
okay.
They've never prioritized guard. I mean, they really they could have kept Kevin Zeitler for relatively cheap last year and didn't want to do that. They don't spend the last, I think, premium pick they spent on a guard was Ben Cleveland in 2021. Otherwise, they have avoided spending premium capital on a guard. So I just don't think it's a position that it's a position they've chosen to devalue. They've looked at the offensive and they said, look, we have to devalue some positions. They like tight ends and they don't like guards as much. So it's just why going with 1 would surprise me so much.
That's a smart way to do it, though. That means that there's not going to be any bookers that the Ravens will be drafting anytime soon in the top 15.
No, I honestly think they've looked at the guard market and looked at how in some ways overpriced the guard market is and just decided that that is a place that they can churn out comp picks. And it's, it's an interesting strategy. It's a case where I would not, again, if you get the chance to upgrade, I would take it, but you look like the Booker's probably the best best guard only prospect in the draft. And he went 12. So at 27, you're to me, you're reaching for a guard if it's at 27. And then most of the guys who would come in and be an upgrade to Falele this year are probably going to be gone by 59.
And you think
I think
go ahead, John.
Oh, I think if we leave the weekend, in all honesty, especially with Booker going as high as he is, if teams start reaching for guards, if we leave the weekend without a guard, I mean, Brandon Scherf's still sitting out there in free agency. I mean, I think that'd be a perfect, very relatively cheap pairing, especially looking at what Zeitler just signed for. I mean, they're around the same age. I mean, I think you can get Scherf for real cheap if you're not high on any of the guards that are still there. I would definitely be shocked if we walked away this weekend without a tackle, though. I think they're definitely looking to find somebody for the future. You've already locked up Rosengarten. You got him at right tackle. Now try to find somebody for Stanley. I love Stanley. I love that we kept him, but we've also seen he's not on the field. He just played his first full season in, I think, 4 years last year. So, I mean, who's to say we don't sign him in week 2, we see another Ronnie Stanley injury, and we're looking around for another tackle. So I think it would be nice to walk away with a potential fill-in for the future, but I would definitely not be shocked to see them walk away without grabbing a guard this weekend.
So what's the feeling as far as edge for the Ravens? Because, talking, just not of course with my people, but also with yours, that this was a position of, really big need for Baltimore. And when we know the Ravens, dominant defenses over the last several years, or, they've been a really good defense for quite a long time. I know last year didn't go all that well, comparatively speaking, but it was always about the pressure. And we just don't see that anymore. They're still pretty good. I know last year was different, but you look at the team, and you still see those 2 young kids, but it's not like they've completely developed yet. I don't know if they still have to hit a ceiling or not. And it's like they're relying on the veteran Kyle Van Noy. And so this is this what most Raven fans are hoping to see, is an edge rusher with their first pick?
I think if it's one of those clear first round guys, yes. I think people are a lot more mixed on Scorton and James Pierce, who are kind of the, depending on how you see it, some people put James Pierce with that second group. I personally have him just a touch below, just because I see him as very similar to Odafe Owe in terms of the development that's going to be needed for him to become a more consistent edge rusher instead of just winning with athleticism. Nick Scorton, I think, is a very sneaky Ravens pick because he's 20 years old, and Eric DeCosta has loved to pick really young defenders at the end of the first round, knowing that you can have them for 5 full years of development as players. But I think they're in a weird place roster wise where they have 2 clear starters in Van Noy and Owe. They have, I think, a clear kind of backup rotational guy in Tavius Robinson, who I think has come along really well in the last couple of years. They have Adisa Isaac, a 3rd-round pick last year, who had the classic rookie issue of a stunted introduction to the NFL with the injuries he was dealing with over the summer. And I think that he has a lot to show that he didn't get a chance to show last year because of that transition. And then David Ajabo is the one that you can't really expect too much from because – that Achilles injury at his pro day really, really robbed him of some of the explosiveness. And similar to Isaac, stunted that rookie year and that development that he needed to start mixing up his moves and adding more power to his game. And so, it feels like they, could add another player. But to me, I wouldn't want to add another player like Isaac, who's ready to compete for snaps right away. I think I would want one who's like Izuraku, who is getting the snaps right away. He doesn't have to fight for them. He deserves them right up front. Or a guy that you are going to let develop a little bit more on the back end with some athletic tools that you're excited about. So I think that's why I'm kind of like day 1 or early day 3. And I'm not super high on this class either. I'm going to go look at my board. I think the strength of this class is kind of late day 2, early day 3, more than it is late day 1, early day 2.
And one of the edge rushers who I'm like really in love with as a again, considering where he's being touted, even with our lads, has him, I believe, like a 5th round grade, is the kid from UCLA, Oluwafemi. Man, I remember looking at film for Carson Schlesinger, and all of a sudden this Oluwafemi kid, I don't remember what number he was, but I just kept seeing this number there, and he kept making some really great plays. And I'm like, who is this guy? And I went ahead and did the homework, and sure enough, I found out the reason why it was hard for me to find out who he was is because he was a linebacker that converted to edge rusher and just broke out as an edge rusher last year for UCLA. And then I saw him in the All-Star game and the preparedness of those All-Star week, and he was not out of place. He looked like he was picked off right where he left off. And then I see that he's still considered where he is. And so I think that's just because probably there's a little bit more developmental in his game. He was only an edge rusher for 1 year. But that's the kind of kid also to keep an eye on a little bit later on for edge rushers, as is Colin Oliver, who was so productive at Oklahoma State. He broke out as a freshman. He looked like he was going to be a freak. That's how good he was. And then he decided Oklahoma State to switch him over to linebacker for about a year or so. So his numbers obviously went down. He still was able to apply pressure and sack the quarterback, not as easily as an edge rusher full time. But that's another guy that a lot of people believe is also going to be hanging around right around 3rd to 5th round. So there are still, as always, going to be some pretty decent players available. And this is why scouting and being a really good overall smart, general manager room, which the Ravens have. And it's the reason why they're successful the way that they are. And it's something that I don't know if Ravens fans are spoiled or not. But they should be, because it's not an easy thing to do, and they do a great job of it.
Yeah, I think Ravens fans can be just a tad spoiled sometimes. We're used to being in the playoffs, and we used to, even with underwhelming teams, we're used to being in the playoffs. And so when we have a good team, the expectations go even higher. A couple picks to catch us up on: Jalen Walker, as expected, to the Falcons, and Walter Nolan, who my prediction for the Cardinals, does end up in Arizona. That puts the Bengals on the clock. And this has been a scenario. I'm not going to say I'm worried about this, because I don't see Derek Harmon as exciting of a prospect as I saw like Travis Hunter, for example. And I was not happy that he was projected to go to the Browns and the Ravens having to face him for the next 5 years at least. But I think the Bengals could go with Derek Harmon here. He is a guy I really like and would like on the Ravens, like we talked about. But I really think he would address a huge, huge, huge need for the Bengals, as well as being, I think, the clear remaining 1st round defensive tackle on the board after Graham, Grant, and Nolan are all taken already. So sorry, my dog is trying to get into whatever she can. I think that's kind of who I'm worried about the Bengals taking. What do you see happening here, Greg?
It's got to be defensive back. I mean, it has to be. You can go Barron, you can go Johnson, you can go Starks. I mean, come on. With the problems that they've been having back there, it has to be they have this luxury of picking any one of those 3 players that are all studs, are all instant impact defensive backs. And look, yes, could they go edge? Yeah, there's still some good edge rushers out there. Stewart's still out there. They could do that. And again, I think that'd be a good pick. You talked about Ezeroku. And there's a few others. Mike Green, who knows where he's going to go. You mentioned a couple others before, but I just think it has to be defensive back.
Yeah, I can see them taking Green too, just because they seem to be okay with off the field issues and players. And I don't want to get into, all of that. I think sometimes we talk about it in a very nebulous way, like with James Pierce Jr. as a 21-year-old. But I think Green has some very clear issues in his past, and the Bengals have, between keeping Joe Mixon for a number of years and drafting Burton last year, there might be a willingness there for them to roll the dice on a guy who, to me, I think is a 1st round talent. It's just that is a real question mark to have in your locker room on your team. Defensive back, Will Johnson would make a lot of sense here.
Another Michigan guy.
Yeah, and they need a pure outside guy.
Yep.
I think that's one of the things with Turner and Hill is that sometimes they're better in the slot. or Hill sometimes even playing safety. And so I think Johnson would give them a clear number one outside guy, kind of lockdown guy that would free up Turner and Hill to play roles that better fit them.
I mean, they could go Starks and then, as John said, maybe turn around in the second round and hit with Benjamin Morrison.
Yeah, I could see that too. But I think the point you were making about Michigan is that this, it wasn't just one they drafted, it was two. And they clearly like the way, they coach up those players and develop them as leaders on their defense. So I could definitely see that happening. I guess Will Johnson is a guy I'm higher on, so I don't love that he's going to be playing the Ravens, a couple times a year for the next 4 years. But it's not Travis Hunter, and that's still my big thing. I think this is probably a good time. Once the Bengals picks comes in, we've been streaming for just over 2 hours now. So once the Bengals pick comes in, we're going to take a brief break until the Steelers are back on the clock at 21, just to let us reset and get some water. Greg, I know that you have to get going here right around 10 o'clock. So I guess what are your final takes on the Ravens first round pick? And maybe who are some other prospects that you just think, regardless of position or need, maybe they really play like a Raven?
Ooh, let's see if I can pick out a few. I've already mentioned a few along the way that I think fit that bill. Hey, I tell you what, if and I have no idea what's going on with Mark Andrews, but if they are looking for some insurance at tight end, that kid Harold Fannin, I think he's going to be a really good player. I know there's a knock on him for a variety of reasons, competition. He's not going to really give you much at all in the blocking department, but who cares? I mean, the guy is just a high. I love that game. Matter of fact, if you want to see a great game for tight ends, the two best tight ends in college football played each other in the same game this season when Bowling Green played Penn State. So if you want to see some great, they both played phenomenally well. He went up against Warren and played just as good as Warren for Bowling Green against Penn State. That should tell you how good Fannin is. So yeah, that's another player I know that we didn't talk about. But yeah, I mentioned a few of the others that I think kind of fit that. I think Oluwafemi is that type of player. So I think that would be a good one. The defensive line is something that I would be intrigued with Baltimore. Because I think if they really want to put themselves in a position to be a dominant type of each of our guys are at a high level. And I'm not saying Broderick Washington isn't a good player, but if they want that high level guy, I'd be interested to find out at some point whether or not they want to do something there at the defensive line position. And obviously they have a different system, and that's the thing too that you had mentioned with Pierce. Being similar to Owe, I believe it was. And that's the thing, is that evaluating some of these players, it is very important to find out, because the Ravens run, 3-4. I know, there's a little variance of that, but, not every one of these edge rushers is capable of being in this 3-4 system. And I'm sure the Ravens, that's why I think Pierce probably is an attractive player to the Ravens, because he played a lot of linebacker there.
All right. Well, we thank you so much, Greg. It was so great having your insight on the stream with us tonight. Fantastic to have you. Hope you enjoy the rest of the draft. And
absolutely.
Thanks so much for your time.
You got it. And by the way, this is the Our-Lads draft guide, so we don't want to forget about telling everybody to. But I don't even know if we have any of these left, to tell you the truth. They said that they're like running out. So if you want one where you don't have to wait for the hard copy to be mailed, even if we have any left, we have a PDF version, so it'll be emailed to you as soon as you sign up and order one. So check it out at ourlads.com. And this has been great. And I look forward to having maybe you guys on one of our shows, because we're going to be talking about the Ravens among a bunch of other teams. So maybe you guys can, I'll see you on that side, because we've got a lot to talk about this summer.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Greg. Have a great night.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
We just see another pick coming in. It's going to be Shamar Stewart to the Bengals, a guy that we've talked about a little bit on the stream so far. Greg, one of your guys, super athletic, will be a problem to block, but once he develops a little bit more nuance, understanding of leverage, a pass rush plan, a lot of those developmental things for an edge rusher, But with that in mind, we are going to take just a little bit of a break here to give us a chance to go to the bathroom, grab some water, that kind of thing. So we're going to be back in just a little while, just as soon as I figure out how to put this on pause. So thanks so much to Greg for joining us. Jared and John and I will be back in a little bit after this.